Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for March 28th, 2022. What is going on in the world is that the shift away from the transatlantic world as a unipolar power is moving more rapidly than ever. It's been underway for a while, but it's picking up steam. Just in the last couple of days, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, and India. The India visit was the first visit by a Chinese leader in 2 years, following some border skirmishes. There's been an attempt by the West to pit India against China, bring India into the Quad, and there was a British delegation scheduled to go to India at the time that Wang Yi was there, and they were disinvited, which tells you something about the change in relations. We see a move toward a ruble-rupee exchange rate. We're seeing the Saudis acknowledging that they're willing to accept yuan, the Chinese currency, in payment for oil. And so this is a rapid motion following the February 4th conference between Putin and Xi Jinping. On March 24th, former Russian President Medvedev had some very significant comments that go toward this very point. He said, quote, "New centers of gravity in international relations are being shaped. The unipolar world is over. The U.S. is no longer the master of the planet Earth," unquote. He described the United States as acting as though it believes that it exists outside international law. And this is the way much of the world views the United States after the adventures in Afghanistan, the destruction that was imposed on Iraq, on Libya, on Syria, on Yemen, going back to the 1999 NATO-US bombings of Serbia. Why is it that there are calls for international tribunals against Putin, but none that were called against Clinton or against Bush or against Obama? Well, that's because the U.S. believes it to be the unipolar order, the power of the world, the author of the rules-based order. But this is not about the United States. The American people don't want this. This is a global establishment of bankers and financiers who are dictating the policies. Now, what we saw in Warsaw this last weekend, with Biden making a comment, blurting out, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power," referring to Putin. Was that the babbling of a madman, or was that part of the policy? Now, we also saw this come up the day before, where he was asked, what if Russia uses chemical weapons? He said the U.S. would respond, quote, "in kind," unquote. The U.S. would use chemical weapons? These comments show an intent that maybe is not there in Biden, but it reflects the discussion that's going on. The comments about Putin having to go were walked back by officials from the State Department and then by Biden himself yesterday when he said, "We're not calling for regime change." But what are they doing? The policy of the West is regime change. There's pressure on Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, to not accept any terms offered by Russia. And this occurred after the United States refused the reasonable proposals for security demands made by Putin, which pretty much left Putin with, as he thought, no choice but to go into Ukraine. And then the sanctions. They openly say the sanctions are designed to destroy the Russian economy and to devastate Putin's plans to modernize Russia. So when Biden says this man, for God's sakes, shouldn't be in power, how do the Russians see it? Well, being somewhat of a gentleman, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Putin, responded by saying, "That's not for Biden to decide. The president of Russia is elected by Russians." Well, Unfortunately, the president of Ukraine in 2014 had been elected by Ukrainians, and he was overthrown by a US-backed coup. Now, what Biden said is the policy of the West, and the Russians know it. Whether he intended to say this or not, this is part of the information warfare, what is now called hybrid warfare. And it includes lies about what's going on militarily. We're being told that Russia is bogged down, that Russia is devastating cities and taking huge numbers of civilian casualties, or imposing huge numbers of civilian casualties. But we don't know if that's true. A lot of this is lies. It's a wartime propaganda. But what we do know is that everything that's being told to you, including the statements from Biden, is part of wartime propaganda. It's to provoke a reaction from Russia, but also to trigger fear in the US and Western Europe as part of the implementation of a war economy. Austerity, rationing, scarcity, it's being put in place already. It's being blamed on Putin, but it's caused by the policies, the rotten policies, the policies that defend the wealth of the wealthiest against the populations of all countries. And you're being told now that it's Russia that's doing it. Before we were told that it's China that's doing it. This is part of war propaganda. An agreement on Ukraine could be reached. There are new talks that were just initiated in Turkey. Zelensky himself said Ukraine could accept neutrality, but then he backed away from it. Now, that's because Zelensky is a puppet of London and Wall Street, and they want Russia destroyed. And the reason they want Russia destroyed, and the same reason they want China destroyed, is they do not want to see a shift away from the Great Reset and the unipolar power of the Western world to a world of sovereign nation states cooperating for mutual benefit. And that's what's implicit with the Belt and Road Initiative from China, with its extension into South Asia, its extension into the Caucasus, into Africa, and even into Europe. By making Russia the boogeyman, they're trying to stop, and with the sanctions, trying to stop the European countries from linking up with Russia and Chinese economies. So that's what this war is about. And that's why the intention underneath all the rhetoric and all the talk is to remove Putin from power and destroy Russia as a sovereign nation. And so we're moving closer to World War III. Some people say we're already in World War III. And it's the Ukrainian people who are paying the biggest price, but also the people of Russia, the people of Western Europe, and the people of the United States. And they're paying that price so that the speculative swindlers of Wall Street and the City of London can maintain their casino economy at your expense. Thanks for joining me today. We'll have a lot more to say this week as events are happening very rapidly. And stay with us at the LaRoucheOrganization.com and SchillerInstitute.com.